Welcome to Walsh College's Conversation with Leaders event, Building Cyber Leaders and Leadership. This is the first in a series of 3 conversations on cybersecurity and how industry leaders should address this pervasive multidisciplinary risk. I'm Scott Trudell. I'm the Executive Director for Advancement at Walsh, and I want to thank our Walsh College Foundation and its volunteers for making events like this possible for our community. At Walsh, we see learning as a transformational lifetime opportunity, and we are grateful for those who support our mission. Important conversations like this are also made possible through the generous philanthropic support of our alumni, friends, and community partners. Our event today is coming to you from Walsh's Cyber Lab, one of our many connected classrooms that allow our faculty to teach courses to remote and in-person students simultaneously in an environment that's very similar to a conventional classroom. Today, I'm honored and pleased to introduce our speaker, Kevin Tierney. As Vice President of Global Cybersecurity for General Motors, Kevin is responsible for overseeing all aspects of cybersecurity risk across the enterprise. The global cybersecurity team is comprised of security teams covering information technology, product development, manufacturing, autonomous vehicle development, GM Financial, GM Defense, and BreakDrop. In his previous role as GM's Chief Product Cybersecurity Officer, Tierney built one of the industry's first internal red team penetration testing labs and launched the first security vulnerability disclosure program of any major automaker. Tierney serves as the chairman of the Automotive ISAC, working to help move the entire industry forward in cybersecurity. Our moderator for today's event is Leon Nash. Leon is a principal in the Deloitte Risk and Financial Advisory Cyber and Strategic Risk Practice. He brings over 24 years of experience helping his clients be secure, vigilant, and resilient in the face of an ever-growing cyber threat. Leon currently serves as Deloitte's U.S. Consumer Cyber Leader, Cyber Internet of Things Leader for the connected vehicle, and is the service line champion for cybersecurity of the future of mobility. We are grateful to have them both here today. Before we start, just a few quick ground rules. First, I want to make you aware that we are recording this session. Second, the mute button is on for all participants at this time. Should you want to ask a question during the discussion, we welcome you to use the chat function to send your message. We will monitor those, and we will leave some time at the end of this conversation to address as many as we can. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Leon for this conversation with leaders. It's all yours, Leon.
Thank you, Scott. Very much appreciated. And we appreciate your patience through the technical difficulties there.
I claim no responsibility.
No responsibility. It's that new Log4j challenge.
Exactly.
That caused that. So, Kevin, again, thank you for your time today, and really excited to have this conversation with you around cybersecurity and what it's meant for you in terms of your career, as well as what does it mean for GM as an organization. So maybe we'll start off by sort of expanding on the description of you and your role. Why don't you give us a quick overview of your role at GM?
Sure. Thanks, Leon, and great to be here with you. It's can't imagine anything better than this, leading up to the holidays. So this is a great conversation to have, and really appreciate the Walsh team for having me here. It's a great time to talk about cybersecurity because things are changing so rapidly. And, my role is somewhat unique. We've talked a little bit about that. And I think discussing it here and how companies are reacting to the cybersecurity risk out there is important. So my role is really overseeing all the risk, in the whole GM portfolio, regardless of what business or area we're talking about. We're really looking at cybersecurity as a business risk now. It's a little bit different than how it used to be in the past, where we were looking at really just the technical bits and bytes. But now it's really a boardroom discussion of what we're doing from protecting our intellectual property, how we're protecting our consumers and their private data, how we're maintaining our operations in all of our plants globally, and not having downtime due to ransomware attacks and things like that. And then how we're transitioning the business in so many ways, whether it's autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, new mobility solutions. They all depend on software and connectivity. And so with it brings cybersecurity risk. So there's so many aspects of what we're doing where I look at my role as enabling all those sort of new capabilities for the business, we want to do those fast. We want to do them very well from a quality perspective, and we want them to be very secure as well, because it's so important for our customer. So just a little bit of insight into my job, and we can get into more of it as we have the discussion.
No, sounds good. So let's go back to where it all began. Tell us a little bit about how did you get your start in cybersecurity?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I sometimes say I'm an accidental tourist to cybersecurity. So my background is really in engineering and system engineering. So I've dealt with electronics, I've dealt with embedded software. And actually before college, I did IT work. I kind of started my own business and computerized, small businesses before, kind of as computers were just getting onto the stage. And so I was helping do that, and probably started doing a little bit of hacking of my own sorts at that time, like autoexec.bat and stuff like that. That's the time I come from. And so, I spent a lot of time in engineering at GM doing software and different component engineering. And it kind of came along where there's this new discipline of product cybersecurity emerging. And I had a mentor at the time that said, hey, why don't you come on over and help me with this? And so I was one of the first employees in that group. We had a few employees, and it was just starting. And that was really where we started to really grow the focus at General Motors around the security of the products. So how are we protecting the vehicles? How are we protecting OnStar, the end-to-end connections, and then the privacy of their data and mobile apps and things like that? And so I got involved in that, and we went through just a rapid evolution of growing that organization, growing the capability, taking a lot of learnings, frankly, from the information security organization of how you protect an enterprise, and applying that in a different way, but similar to the vehicle systems. Because as we know, it's a different type of technology. Principles are similar, but it requires some different nuances. So I helped build that organization, I guess culminating as the Chief Product Cybersecurity Officer in about 2018. And then as that organization matured, we kind of continued to take a further look at how do we mature cybersecurity for the whole company. And really, if you think about, you put yourselves in Mary Barr's shoes, who's our CEO. She really wants to understand cybersecurity for the whole company. She doesn't want to just understand, how is information security doing and product security, and we have Cruise and we have GM Financial, and having all those as separate stories. We really want to consolidate that and really raise what are the biggest risks for the whole company. And that's what we're focused on now. And we're continuing to make sure that we understand risk across all those domains. We elevate, what are the biggest risks for the company, and we make sure that we have the right mitigations in place. So we use things like the NIST framework, and we measure ourselves, and we report that out, and we make changes, and we evolve. And, that's the fun of it.
So you mentioned a couple of interesting things there. Probably I'm going to dive into a little bit, automotive, right? So automotive as an industry, faces challenges from a cybersecurity perspective on what I always consider 4 different fronts, right? So you have the typical enterprise, which every corporation deals with. You touched on the product, the vehicle itself. You touched on consumer, and you touched on manufacturing, right? Because a lot of people tend to forget manufacturing, but it's a key and critical aspect. How is GM approaching cybersecurity differently, for the organization as an automotive, but then now as a broader, more emerging technology company as you're going through digital transformation?
Sure. I think it's really in the culture. It's the prioritization that we place on cybersecurity every day. The fact that we meet with our senior leadership team quarterly, we meet with our board quarterly. We have a very transparent and direct conversation about what are the risks to the company. And that sets the tone for all of our operations, and it filters down to the entire team. And whether you're developing software, or you're working on a car, or you're an analyst, on an IT system, the importance of cybersecurity is very, I guess, prevalent across GM. And so it's worked into our goals, it's worked into our workflows, it's worked into our processes and our policies. And I like to say it's somewhat institutionalized. That's my goal, is to make it just part of the fabric. Much like safety is, safety is a core part of how we operate within GM. And, I look at cybersecurity as similar to that. And so, as we work across all these different aspects of the business, like I mentioned before, there's very many things that are similar from a principle perspective. You kind of take parallels back to how do you protect a castle. The philosophies of security can be very similar, but how you execute it in each domain is different, right? How you protect an IT server versus a vehicle versus a plant robot. Those are very different. And then at the same time, every business unit is going through different levels of transformation, whether it's new technology, new applications, new ways of consumers interacting, or even migrating some systems to the cloud. And those all, obviously have impact on the security strategy as well. So what we do is we bring together all the chief security officers across those domains. We share information. We kind of challenge each other. We ask questions. If we have something working in one area, we want to share that. If someone has something and others are skeptical, I want to know why, and I want to really kind of figure out what are the best ideas, and how can we apply those in a consistent way. And it's not always pretty. It's always it's a challenge because as when you're working across so many domains and the complexity and the size of GM, you can't always just snap your fingers and everything's identical. But I think over day by day, as we have those conversations, we're moving in the right direction.
So you mentioned a number of activities and underlying leadership skills that you're leveraging to do that, and not once did you really mention technology, right? Tell us about some of the other leadership skills, that you've either brought to the table, or you're cultivating and building to really be effective in your role.
Yeah, so I think cybersecurity as a discipline is a hard thing to do, frankly, and it's evolving quickly. And so what made a really good cyber leader maybe 10 or 15 years ago is, I think, dramatically different today. And a lot of it is around understanding technology, but being able to communicate about it. That's really, I think, the crux of the issue. Oftentimes it boils down to, can you tell a message to your leadership, to the board, that's compelling, that they understand, where you're not just putting fear and uncertainty and doubt in people's minds. It's not a look at how many numbers of attacks, or it's not a magnitude issue. It's really distilling down to really what are the vital issues, and not making it really necessarily about technology. Of course, there's always a technology aspect, but it's more about what is this risk to the business. And one of the things that we did this year is we went through some of our top risks from a cyber perspective, and we put a dollar amount to it. We said, hey, if this was going to happen, that's what it means to the company from a financial perspective. And that is in the terms that CEOs and boardrooms understand. It's not just this could happen and it could be a big risk, but really it has a financial backing. And so I think as the companies can come along and understand risk in those terms, cybersecurity really becomes another big risk they're managing, along with many other things that they deal with every day.
Now, that's key and critical, is that evolution of the thought around, it's not just cyber risk, but cyber risk is an aspect of a business risk. Mm-hmm. And you touched on something that definitely I want to dig in on a little bit, or dive into a little bit, because ultimately you're describing what is the evolution of the chief cybersecurity officer, chief information security officer, those roles into an organization. You talked about talking in the language of business, right? And because now, as you mentioned, a lot of CISOs are getting in front of the C-suite, they're getting in front of the board, right? And they have to be able to talk in the language of business, right? And in ways that can easily be understood by those non-IT, non-cyber participants. Where do you see yourself in terms of evolving the role further, right? In terms of, what are the things that, the people that are listening in, what are the skill sets that they should be building in order to evolve where cybersecurity is headed?
Yeah, it's a great point, and it does continue to evolve. I think, first of all, being able to understand technically, what's going on is important. You can't divorce yourself of that. I spent a lot of time in electrical engineering, software engineering, embedded systems, a little bit in IT, so I understand the underlying pieces of it. But my job is more to take that and then be able to articulate what that really means, in a business dimension. So really, it's also understanding the business. It's understanding, what's the business trying to accomplish? What are the goals of the business? Where is it strategically going? Because as the company rapidly evolves, and General Motors is going through a rapid transformation right now, we're making changes every day, it seems, to our organization and where we want to focus our resources. Every one of those nowadays has some sort of cybersecurity, repercussion or something that we have to consider, because it involves data, it involves connectivity to the customer, it involves, mobile apps or what have you. And so it's really being able to understand the business, it's being able to communicate, and it's being able to really extend yourself out of your own organization and network across the whole company. There's very few functions across GM that I don't have some sort of relationship with. And it's really, I try to make it proactive. I try not to make it punitive. Obviously, there's always, the certifications and, some of the challenges that come at a technical level, but from a business level perspective, we really are just trying to understand strategically, where are we going? And then what are the things we need to do to line up to get there, to enable it so that it's not a no at the end, it's a yes. And we have the right security in place from the start.
Yeah.
So easier said than done, not perfect, but it really becomes just another part of the overall business and how you manage that. And so, myself, I'm still maturing and growing and trying to figure out how to do that across the entire company. And I'm looking for leaders all the time that can do this as well. We need great technical competence in all those domains we talked about earlier. We need people that understand the robots and how they operate and work in the plants. We need to understand the vehicle, to a deep degree. How do the networks in the vehicle work? How does the software work? How does the supply chain operate? The IT networks, how is software developed? How are the networks maintained, et cetera? But we also need to understand, and this is where we're spending a lot of time, how those now integrate together, because now an IT system and a vehicle system are now conjoined. And so a lot of times the security risk is in the middle, it's in the interfaces. And so how do we kind of get to the next level of understanding the integration of security domains as technologies start to come together? So it's a lifelong learning process. I think that's another thing for, if you want to be in cybersecurity, you just have to be willing to learn every day. There's new things. And frankly, I read the newspaper, probably more newspaper than I want to read. It's usually not newspaper, it's digital these days, but you have to stay up on what's happening, because you just mentioned, one of the big vulnerabilities that hit here in the last week. I mean, that's had huge repercussions in our company and across, the world, but that's just one aspect. We're also dealing with things like, macroeconomics and, I guess, political tensions around the globe, and those have repercussions on potential cyber attacks as well. So you really have to be a student of what's happening in the world as well. So.
No, what you just said actually struck a chord with me, because I look at, my own personal experience and how I got into cybersecurity. My degree is in civil engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I did not stay with civil engineering, as my focus once I graduated, was because of exactly what you described. When I looked at civil engineering and my co-op experience that I obtained, it was really, I really came to the quick conclusion, of how you apply civil engineering, at least with roadway design. It was the same practices and principles that we've been doing for literally 50, 75 years. The thing that had changed in civil engineering was the fact that we were using computers to facilitate the roadway design, determining how much earth you needed to move from one spot to another, and ultimately putting together the roadway design. And what I realized quickly was computers were going to be that path forward, right? And sort of what you said, that what I knew this year really serves as a foundation for next year, but it doesn't really guarantee me success in the next year. I had to continuously learn.
That's right.
And that challenge really fed me and excited me about cybersecurity. You also touched on, your team and your leaders. What are you doing to cultivate leaders? What are you doing to cultivate new skill sets and mindsets as you evolve cybersecurity at GM?
Oh, I think it's so important. And, one of the things, and we can put it out as just the baseline, there's a lack of talent in the cybersecurity space. Yep. I mean, this is a huge challenge. And I think one of the issues we have in cybersecurity is cybersecurity means a lot of things. It's not just hackers. It's not just people that understand bits and bytes. It's people that understand risk frameworks and governance structures. It's people that can do intelligence gathering. It's people that can communicate. It's people that can write requirements. It's people that can talk to people and execute things. There's so many things that really fall into the umbrella of a potential cybersecurity job. So it's really not a one size fits all. And that's why I strongly encourage people that may say, well, I don't have a background in, well, I didn't have a background in cybersecurity either. I had a certain skill set. And then I learned a lot of things along the way, right? I learned from a lot of security experts and got to understand the philosophies of security, and then be able to apply them to a domain and then apply them to a business. And I think that's where there's a lot of power. So I think, as I continue to work with our leadership team, which is great, they're all great leaders in their own right. It's always about making sure that we understand the broader view, because leaders in any organization tend to be focused on their mission. And what I try to bring to the conversation is looking at a broader view, looking at the interfaces, understanding how what I'm doing impacts an end customer, right? Yep. So one example is, in information security, Obviously, I wasn't the CISO, I was the Chief Product Cybersecurity Officer, but now working with our CISO in our organization, a lot of what I see is, and I always use myself as the worst example. I say a lot of our controls that we give to the end user to help with security, people circumvent or they don't use because they either don't understand how they work, or they don't work well, or they're not helpful in what the engineer or the end user is trying to do. And so I think there's so much that can be done to improve security controls and tools by looking at the end, the customer experience of it. And then if we improve that, it'll improve the efficacy of security. So having those sort of conversations, bringing in kind of an external viewpoint and what the business sees and is struggling with, because I always, security is a balance. Security is not like this. It has to be like this. You have to have the right security to the right level, and really nothing more and nothing less, and also be able to enable the business. Because if you're 100% secure, but you can't do any work, you're not going to be in business very long. So, our work is try to always strike that balance, always make it proactive. So a lot of what we talk about is building relationships, and not making it punitive, not making it this negative conversation, but extending the olive branch and saying, hey, how can I help us achieve these goals together? So I'd say a lot of times, I'm not going to help people become better at hacking a car necessarily from a technical perspective, but we spend a lot of time on the softer side of things, and how do we communicate that, and how do we do that from a repeatable and very standardized way.
And that's music to my ears, right? Because I work a lot with chief cybersecurity officers, chief information security officers, and a lot of the traditionalists, tend to focus on bits and bytes and doing the focusing on the technology, but seeing organizations that are successful, like GM, in terms of addressing cybersecurity in its entirety across the entire organization. It's all the non-technical things that allow you to be successful, that really enable adoption of the controls, of the policies, of the structure. And ultimately, what I found is, by focusing on the non-technical, you're able to actually get better adoption and better ultimately better controls or better security, broader cybersecurity in the environment. I'll share with the audience that you and I have been working together for the past 2 years in and around the automotive ISAC. And obviously that was a big first step for the industry as a whole. And you are the chair of the chairman of the board for the automotive ISAC. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing there and what your ultimate goal for the auto ISAC and the industry is from a cybersecurity perspective. What are you trying to get to?
Yeah, so the ISAC, and for those that don't know what an ISAC is, it's an information sharing and analysis center. And these are organizations, they're nonprofit organizations that are somewhat sponsored by the Department of Homeland Security. It's an independent organization, so it's not tied to the government. They just enable it. And what it does is it allows an industry to come together and share threat and vulnerability information in a confidential way, in a non-competitive way. And so we stood ours up in about 2015. So we're about 6 years old now. And we have really the majority of the OEMs here in North America and a huge slice of our supply base as well. And our focus is really getting better around security for all of us, right? We think that it's not a competitive issue. It's one of those things where we all need to be good at this, because if one OEM has a major issue, it could jeopardize the trust of the whole consumer base. And so it's really incumbent on all of us to protect our products and our systems, or else we could potentially, as an industry, erode the trust around managing data and managing some of these new advanced systems. And so we spend a lot of time sharing information, sharing things that do happen to us, sharing advanced vulnerabilities. And then one of the recent things that we've tried to grow in the last 2 years is education and training among the membership. Really trying to continue to grow the maturity and capability of everyone. And it's not unlike what we're trying to do in general across our entire supply chain, where you have a lot of different companies, different sizes, different capabilities. A lot of those companies are small and medium-sized businesses, and they just don't have the resources to apply to a large cybersecurity program like a big company like GM might have. And so how do we enable those companies? How do we give them more resources and capabilities? And frankly, from a cybersecurity solution, and we're not a cybersecurity solution company, but from a cybersecurity solution company perspective, how do we start making it easier? How do we, this is a technology problem. So let's solve technology problems with technology, but not make it so complicated that you have to have a PhD to figure out the bits and the bytes and how to pull it all together. So we're doing a lot of that as well, because it's one of those things where we're only as strong as our weakest link as an industry. And so it's the OEMs working together, but it's also our supply base. And that's a global effort, right? We get parts from all over the world. I think we've all seen the complexity of our supply chain in the last year, and that's real. And that's not going to change overnight. And so we have to make sure not only logistically we can do it, but from a security perspective, we're intact as well.
So what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of opportunity, right, in and around cybersecurity for our audience members out there. Any specific area of cybersecurity that someone aspiring to get into cybersecurity should really focus on?
Well, I guess my advice would be think about what you're already good at. Take the skills that you have, whether you're an up and coming computer programmer, or maybe you're in communications and you're really good at telling stories, or you're great at presentations, or you love doing analytics and working Excel spreadsheets. I know there's so many different skill sets. Take those and then start looking at different cybersecurity curriculums, because there's usually some sort of program that supports that passion. One of the things that I spent a ton of time doing, and you might find it shocking, is writing narratives. So for our senior leadership in our board, we write a narrative. We don't do PowerPoint slides. So I spend a lot of English, my English efforts, in my day job. And so it's not as obvious, I think, for people trying to getting into the area, that there's so many diversities with skill required. And so, think about, you can get into red team penetration testing if you're really good with software and understanding how systems work, and you can do that across many domains. You can hack a computer, software, a car, robots. Almost anything that has software, that is fair game, and it's a lot of fun, for a lot of people. But if you like understanding, risk frameworks and doing, putting a lot of analytics around things. How we measure ourselves across all those domains I talked about, and how we score ourselves on a quarter. That's a huge effort, and that's not necessarily super technical, but it's challenging, and it's so important to how we communicate the story. And so I'd go back to those, the things that you're really passionate about, the backgrounds that you have, and then what are the great entry points into cybersecurity? And then once you get into a cybersecurity team, or you're doing a certain function, what I find is having people move around and do different things and grow capability becomes very important. Because right now, especially in the product and automotive domain, there aren't a lot of great programs out there. They're starting to be more and more, but we're still very, early in that process. And so a lot of the cybersecurity capabilities have to be developed either through continuing education or on-the-job training.
Yep.
And so I say, take a risk like I did, and jump into it. And I think it's one of those things where you'll continue to learn every day, and you'll find the thing that fits best for you and your career.
I'll share with you. I've worked with some people from interesting backgrounds, right? I had someone that early in my career had an anthropology degree, and I thought that was an interesting mix. But now, sort of, I've come to the same conclusion that you just mentioned, in terms of it takes diversity of thinking and experiences really to solve a lot of these complex problems, and sometimes even to demystify these complex problems and really put a simplistic understanding and spin on what we're actually seeing, and being able to talk in a language that everyone can understand, so that whatever the challenge is, whether, again, I use the Log4j example, how do how you explain that to the business, to your business stakeholders, really will enable them to better understand what their role is in a cybersecurity position within the broader organization, right? Because ultimately, I always look at cybersecurity shouldn't just be your responsibility. For example, at GM, it's everyone's responsibility to be able to enact that.
And I think that's an important point. And one of the things that we just stood up at GM this year in October, National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, is a program called our Cyber Champion Program. Yep. So it's an internal group. And what we did was we actually sent a note out to every employee in GM and said, if you want to get more involved, you're not a cybersecurity group member, but you're doing some function and you want to know more about cybersecurity, join in, and we'll give you additional training. You'll have maybe some webinar sort of things like this, or there might be some other things that we do throughout the year just to bring them in a bit to the cybersecurity conversation within the company. And we have hundreds of people that signed up immediately for that. And it's fascinating because first of all, the distribution across the company is as even as I've ever seen. It's like exactly how you would want it to be, just randomly. And second of all, the people, I'd say, I think it was almost 2/3 of the people that joined had personally had some sort of cybersecurity story, or whether it's in their personal life or they're working on it at work, or something impacted them at work, or what have you. And so these are the best people you want to connect with across the company, because they've had an impact and they understand the risks of cybersecurity maybe better than others, and they're the ones who can really help to continue pushing that culture and tell those stories. We want to be able to tell the stories, just like we do in other parts of the business around safety issues and other things. We want to make that a personal connection, because not everyone's had a cyber hack, or they don't always understand the importance of it. And so being able to connect, this extended group of cyber champions across the company is so helpful. So I'm so happy we started that program. I think it's going to be great to continue pushing the culture forward.
No, that's key and critical. And I found that in my career as well, in terms of simplifying and involving, all aspects of the business to be able to really understand the impact of cybersecurity. Usually, I always tend to start with the conversations in and around their family, right? In and around, how do you protect your children? How do you protect, your family from the cyber threats? Because it's now in every aspect of everything that we're doing. I mean, we're getting phishing emails, we're getting texts, we're getting all these different things that are, causing challenges and risks to our families, and really, shifting that mindset. Because I think once you can change that mindset, it really then opens up, okay, I need to be more vigilant. I need to be more active in terms of securing that risk. Looking at the broader digital transformation that, GM and others in the automotive, actually a number of different industries are going through. Right. What do you see as the one big thing that you're trying to anticipate, or we're trying to address from a cybersecurity perspective going forward? I know you have electrification going on with the vehicles. We got, the connected, autonomous. I mean, all these different things, customers. What's your one big thing that you're looking to address?
Yeah, that's a tough question, because there are so many fronts to that equation. I think, and you mentioned it, I mean, the whole industry is transforming. You're seeing the electric vehicle revolution occurring. You're seeing autonomous vehicles starting to be deployed now for really the first time without drivers in a pretty pervasive way. And that's just the start of that whole process. And kind of whole new ways of thinking about how we interact with our customers, right? And so every one of those aspects is growing extreme complexity around data and software. The data and software are just going to explode in terms of complexity. And so making sure that the controls and strategies that we've had historically, which were maybe around different assumptions and different sizes and different constraints, can scale to these sort of new ways of doing work. I'd say that's probably my biggest concern, because I think we're at this point where we're seeing some discontinuities in the technology. Like, to get from here to an autonomous vehicle, it's changing. It's changing in a lot of ways in terms of what that compute looks like, how that software is developed, how that software is maintained. It's a very much different product than a consumer vehicle. And so I think new strategies are having to be kind of developed and thought about, and also understanding the risk profile. So, as these products are used in different ways, we have to step back and understand what is the risk of that, and what are the ways that people can interact.
For you guys, from an automotive perspective, you also have this broad ecosystem of, like you said, suppliers, and then you start thinking about some of the cool and interesting things around mobility, right, and all those ecosystems, so on and so forth. How are you starting to work with and address some of the challenges in those ecosystems with those third parties? Because some of those third parties are your non-traditional suppliers. Some of them are new startups. Some of them may be municipalities.
Yeah, I mean, in our ecosystem, we're working with everybody. I mean, and I think a lot of companies are. They're working with the smallest of companies to the biggest of companies. And I don't need to name names to kind of know that whole list. And they all present their own unique challenges. And so we have a large team focused on supply chain and third-party security. And that's one piece of it, is just making sure we understand what's in our ecosystem. We understand the security posture of those companies. We're helping with resources. And we're making sure those companies are doing the right thing. We're spending a lot of time there because, frankly, we're seeing impacts in the supply chain, right, from plants going down due to ransomware and other things. So we know we still have an opportunity there. And I think it's really an industry challenge. It's actually cross industry because there's a lot of companies that share industries, and they share suppliers for many different things. Yep. It could be anything from someone making a part to doing legal services to doing consulting services. All these companies have different levels of cyber risk. And so making sure we're doing the right thing, from procurement through, to contracting, through working with them, and then responding to a situation. The other thing that I think is maybe more of on the horizon, or something that we're just now starting to work on in a more pervasive way, is really the systems security problem, right? It's becoming more and more apparent. We talk about things like vehicle to vehicle communication, vehicle to infrastructure communication. I mean, some of these things have been out for a while in practice and conceptually, and are still early in scaling. But as you get into these more connected technologies, like we see in the internet, but applied to devices and safety critical systems, and as that gets more and more complicated, there has to be trust across all these devices. And I think that's going to become the next real big challenge, is how do we really know what's what, who's communicating to who, and who trusts. How do you develop that trust across a huge network of things? We've done it in the IT world to a degree, but I think to get to the next level from a safety system perspective, there's a lot more work to do to prove that out.
So as you're talking, I see the excitement, I see the passion, that you have for cybersecurity and what you're doing at GM. What advice would you give to the audience out there in terms of, getting started and getting down that path of getting into cybersecurity?
Well, I would say, first of all, jump in. If you're interested, if you have questions, I know Walsh has a great cyber program here. Ask some questions, with the faculty and the program administrators, and other schools too, and then frankly companies. I mean, if you're interested in changing into a cyber career, you don't have to go too far to find job postings around cybersecurity, or reach out to leaders like us. I mean, we're always happy to talk with people that are considering, getting into cybersecurity and want to learn more. I have those conversations on a daily basis, so don't hesitate to do that, because I think we need all the help we can get. I think the diversity of thought is super important to what we do every day. So bringing what you're already good at into a cybersecurity discipline is super important. And then just stay open-minded and be willing to learn. And there's going to be some things you don't know, and you just have to figure them out along the way. But it's going to be a challenge for all of us. We need people not only in GM, but really every company. So I can't hire everyone, but, but frankly, every company needs expertise. And so I just encourage everyone to consider it. Believe in yourself, believe in your background, and just jump into it.
No, a lot of great insight, Kevin, and definitely I think the audience will appreciate it, exactly what you shared. What we wanted to do is welcome back Scott. Scott, I know you have we've been receiving questions and such, and if you could share some of the questions that you're.
Well, thank you both, and it's a great conversation. We do have a couple of questions. The first one comes from Mark Albrecht, and maybe expand a little bit on this from your conversation. The question is, how is the business community partnering with our government to combat cybersecurity attacks and ransomware from bad foreign actors?
Yeah, great question. And so I guess maybe I'll give a little bit of background. In my role, I'm probably one of the few executives in GM that has a direct relationship with a lot of government agencies. Usually that's a public policy or some of those sort of functions. But at GM, we have a lot of direct relationships with the cybersecurity groups across many of the 3 and 4 and 5 letter agencies that are out there. And so we've had those relationships for a number of years. I think you're seeing, CISA, which is a part of the Department of Homeland Security, which is, kind of the center point for cybersecurity now, at least that's trying to be created. Jen Easterly just assumed the post there, running that organization. And you're seeing them really reaching out to industry, really trying to create kind of a central point for cybersecurity, because I think one of the challenges we have is there's a lot of capability in the government, but there's a lot of point-to-point conversations, and there's not a great coordinating function in all aspects. And so I think what CIS is doing there is really helping to try to pull that together, trying to bring in the White House and other groups to make sure that we have a strategic focus. And when you're looking at the country and you're looking at critical infrastructure, you can't secure everything evenly. You really need to find your priorities, just like General Motors has to do across our supply base and how we look at things. And so I think we're starting to see that really take hold. And so it's those ongoing conversations we have. You're seeing a lot of bills go through. You're seeing a lot of executive orders go through. This administration definitely has a big focus on cybersecurity. The prior did to some degree, but I think there's a lot of action right now, and I think that's going to strengthen. The government needs to do more, frankly, because we're, as a company, I often feel like we're on the front lines of a war, and we don't always have the support of all the benefits of the whole government could bring along. So more to do. I see good progress, but it's an ongoing effort.
We have another question from Stephen Amato. He asks, what is the biggest cybersecurity threat that keeps you up at night? What plans have you put into place to kind of help mitigate that threat?
Yeah, good question. I mean, if I had one specific one, I probably wouldn't divulge it here with my exact plan to mitigate it, but because I would assume I haven't mitigated it already, and I can't. I'm not going to disclose that. But I think it's a great question. I think it really goes back to what we talked about throughout this conversation. There are a lot of things happening at any one time. It's generally not one thing. It's generally many things. It's reacting to the things we know, like the Log4j thing, which once we know something, it's bad, but we know it and we're mitigating it. A lot of it's the things we don't know and making sure that we have the right controls in place for the things that haven't been disclosed or we don't know what's coming. And so that's my big fear. I mentioned it earlier about the being a student of the world. I mean, there's so much kind of political uncertainty in the world today around, US, China, Russia relations and all that sort of thing that really plays into cyber risk to a great extent. And as that whole conversation and situation evolves, I think it's going to have repercussions on what we see in our environment. And so follow that closely, but that's, those are some of those nonlinear things that we can't necessarily plan for. We just have to watch, make sure that we're prepared, make sure we have as many controls in place to prevent attacks in general, and be able to react if something happens.
Yeah, if I could add,
this
is where we see, and I aside from Kevin, I do a lot of work across the industry from a cybersecurity perspective, and ultimately you touched on the key aspect, right? You're not going to know everything, right, in terms of what what all your vulnerabilities are, but do you have an ability to detect and capture these things? Do you have an ability to understand what your baseline in terms of normal behavior is across all the different environments that you mentioned, right? Whether it's the enterprise, whether it's the connected vehicle and that ecosystem, or even manufacturing, right? And then once you detect it, do you have a clear path for responding? What do you do? Who does what? How do you shore up the ranks once you do that? And that's where we see a lot of, clients like GM that are really focused on that. Yes, you want to address, and I'm using the NIST framework, right? You want to be able to, identify and protect, but, detect and response, you have to be able to understand what those things are. And really a lot of organizations, and I think you touched on it, are always worried about detecting. Are you going to be able to find this stuff or find these malicious activities in a timely fashion?
I am muted there, but we have one final question because we're going to give a little bit of extra time for the late start. But our question comes from, right now it comes from Jim Libs, and he says, Or he asks, is GM or any other large corporation with so many different legacy IT systems better off keeping those systems in place so the company is not totally exposed in case of an attack? Or is it better to get one system and implement as much security as possible?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's really not as simple as that, unfortunately. And it's funny you bring it up because we just had legacy application security as a topic in our December board meeting. So this is a topic that is out there. It's something that everyone wants to understand because any environment has, and we could spend a half an hour defining what legacy application means, and we've done that because it's not so simple. But if you think about an enterprise the size of GM, there are applications and systems going into legacy status all the time, and then new systems coming in behind them. And so the big issue is, of those legacy systems, if you want to define legacy system as just an old or maybe an unsupported application, well, does that necessarily infer vulnerability? Some systems are old, but they don't have vulnerabilities, or they're not on a tech platform, or they're not internet connected, or they're not connected to anything, or they're extremely protected from a firewall perspective. And maybe that application is the thing running the whole company, and it's super important. And keeping it a legacy application well protected is a rational thing for a certain amount of time. However, over the long haul, you want to retire as many of those systems as you can and get to an architecture where systems can be patched, they can be monitored, they can be updated, and you have support from the manufacturer and other things. So it's a little bit of both worlds. You want to keep evolving, but there's always going to be some level of legacy app you have to protect. And it's really boils down to having an asset inventory, knowing which apps that you're worried about, and making sure you have the right controls around them. And then I think you can kind of live in both worlds.
Yeah, because I'd add on. Even with now, obviously the movement to cloud, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now even, for some of my clients, the definition of that legacy app is anything now on-prem, right? Because now, all these on-premise applications are being moved to the cloud, and using that as an opportunity to modernize those applications and reassess the architecture, so on and so forth. If you're going to move over to the cloud, but all those same technologies still bring challenges. And again, I keep going back to Log4j. It's impacted even a lot of the cloud platforms as well. Because they're using a lot of those legacy. They're using a lot of those same underlying platforms and applications to deliver a lot of the services. So it gets interesting when you talk about legacy and bringing those things forward. But this will be something, I think, at least as IT and cybersecurity professionals, there'll always be something that we're moving from and to. Absolutely. In terms of those capabilities and getting to whatever the next new best thing is in terms of how we deliver our services. Yeah,
we apply a substantial part of our budget to upgrading systems every year. Mm-hmm. And so it's one of those prioritization based on risk challenges. And I think you bring up a great point that, the cloud is not some magical, utopia where everything goes away. Oftentimes you're just moving the problem. It's just a different computer, a different system. And sometimes the visibility is different, right, between your on-prem environment and a cloud environment. So those are a lot of the challenges we have to think through on every system.
Yep.
Well, thank you both, gentlemen. That was our last question. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you to our moderator, Leon, for this very thoughtful discussion about building cyber leaders and leadership. So thank you for joining us today. As I mentioned previously, this is the first in a series of 3 discussions on cybersecurity. Look for more conversations on this topic and other areas, including the future of accounting coming in 2022. To stay up to date on all of our virtual and live events, please follow Walsh College on LinkedIn or visit us at foundation.walshcollege.edu and sign up for updates. If you or your business are interested in learning more about what Walsh can do for you, please email us at advancement@walshcollege.edu. Again, thank you to our 2 guests, Kevin and to Leon. Thank you to all of our attendees who joined us today, and the great questions and the great conversation. We look forward to seeing you at future discussions. And as I said, this was recorded. We will make this available to all attendees and our guests, and you'll be able to share this with your colleagues and friends as well. Once again, My name is Scott Trudell for Walsh College, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.